the audience, kind of asking who we have on the call. So the first question is, and please, when you see the poll pop up, click which answer identifies you. The first question is, how would you most closely identify your current sector? So we'll be launching that poll. And then we'll share the results here. It looks like we have 60% for-profit on the call and 40% nonprofit on the call. And then the next question, and this will really help Mark and Jonathan speak to the audience more specifically and tie in the work they're talking about. The next question is about which area you are in focus, either you're for-profit or nonprofit. This poll.
We'll give you just another minute. So we'll just close the poll and share the results here. So it looks like we're actually split pretty well between corporate social responsibility, marketing communications, PR, and volunteer coordinator community outreach. And then we've also got a few folks from development corporate partnerships. And we are actually just going to take 1 minute. We've got a technical difficulty, so hang tight and enjoy the poll.
While we're getting things back up and running on our end, Mark and Jonathan, before I pass the controls to you, as we're waiting, if you would like to open with an introduction about IMC Squared, I will then, as you're wrapping up, I can pass over the presentation to you.
Sure. This is Mark McKinney. IMC Squared is a marketing agency that's changing, and we're changing in a direction I think that's going to be interesting for you folks to hear about. The company was started about 15 years ago and began by building websites for different properties, and over the course of time we've really focused our efforts in terms of trying to understand what our purpose was going to be and how we were going to take our work out into the world. And for about the last 5 years, we've really refined very clearly what we believe is the direction we want to go. And our purpose in all of what we do is advancing relationships. And our vision is to transform the world of marketing. So what we're going to be talking about today is the way that we believe marketing is going to be practiced in the coming years. And we want to be part of the force that moves it in that direction. We do work for many for-profit companies, and we do work for nonprofits as well, primarily through our efforts called the Weekend of Love. And maybe I'll let Jonathan just mention a little bit about what that's about, because he's the father of the Weekend of Love.
Sure. I mean, that's actually how we had kind of as Megan mentioned, how our relationship with VolunteerMatch actually developed. So Weekend of Love is kind of, you know, a twice-a-year program where we actually go to our people our staff and employees to find out what nonprofit organizations and causes that they're passionate about, and then we just we make it happen internally to staff those projects and then to deliver the same high quality kind of services that we would deliver throughout the year to for-profit clients that we have.
Okay, Megan, does that sound good?
Wonderful. Okay, we are going to pass the keyboard over to you, Mark. So the controls are now headed to you. As you move your mouse, you'll be able to, there you go. It shows that you have control.
All right.
Wonderful.
Okay, very good. So we're going to basically do this presentation in two parts. I'm going to talk about the relationship era of marketing, and then Jonathan is going to talk about some of the implications for that new era in terms of how for-profits and not-for-profits work together. So a little bit of a double presentation here, and we'll try and take a break right in the middle in case there are a couple of questions we can answer. But just to get started here, we are going to enter the relationship era, and as we move forward, wanted to show you some words that I sometimes hear when I tell people that I work in the field of marketing. Unfortunately, the words are not necessarily words that I typically like to have associated with me, but these are things that I hear. And as you probably know, a lot of advertising and marketing these days is viewed as something that's, of these words, perhaps the nicest word is persuasive, and for other people they see it maybe even more as manipulative, dishonest, using spin to try and convince people to buy products or to vote for certain candidates. That kind of reputation, where we don't have the trust of people is troubling. In poll after poll, when you ask people what are the most trusted types of occupations, teachers and police officers and nurses rank very highly, and fortunately advertising executives are at the bottom along with the used car salesmen and the lawyers. And my apologies to any lawyers on the phone, but unfortunately it's true. So at IMC Squared, we really thought, let's figure out why this is the case and see if we can't do something about it. And so to do so, we really took heed of something that Buckminster Fuller said. If you want to change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. It's not enough to just rail against what's wrong. Come out and make something that you think is right. And so that's what we're trying to do at IMC Squared. And what we have done is we've taken a look at the way marketing has been practiced and broken it into some eras. And those eras are well defined. I'm going to just walk through those pretty quickly here. But from the 1900s to the 1960s, a lot of marketing was in what we call the product era. This is where mass marketing followed mass production, right? So suddenly people could buy boxes of soap flakes or other kinds of products they'd never seen before. And in this era, it was all about me, the brand, or me, the organization, or me, the company, talking to you, the customer, or you, the consumer. And the way you would win in the product era was to inform people about your products. The company with the highest hill and the biggest megaphone would be the winner. Well, as more and more companies entered into manufacturing and as we became a global society and goods were brought in from other places, what happened was marketers decided there's got to be a different way. It's not working anymore to just shout our message out to the masses. And so what became the next model is the consumer era. And this is really, if you watch Mad Men, this is where the Mad Men advertising model comes into play. The David Ogilvies and Bill Birnbachs of the world said, we need to introduce the practice of psychology and sociology and anthropology into the practice of marketing. What we need to do is we need to learn everything we can about you, the customer, so that you will buy from me, the brand. So notice that it appears that we're saying, let's be very customer-centric, But really what I'm trying to do in this model is I'm trying to learn everything I can about you to reach you at your moment of vulnerability, when you are most vulnerable to picking off my product from the shelf. And the way you win in that era is by persuading people to buy. Now, I'm talking about this as if it were a for-profit only kind of message, but it's not. I think for those of you who are working for nonprofits or for not-for-profits, you understand your marketing is probably very similar to this, right? What you want to do is you want to understand everything you can possibly understand about donors or about volunteers so that you can get them to engage with you, the organization. You can persuade them that your cause is the one they should give their money to, or your cause is the one they should give their time to. The problem with the consumer era of marketing is that people feel persuaded, or worse, some of the other words you saw, coerced or manipulated. And in this age when we have such free flow of information now, with the internet being what it is and social networks being what they are, the problem is that people are having conversations about an organization or about a brand that we never even know. Those conversations are taking place constantly, and people are evaluating brands or organizations along all sorts of dimensions. And frankly, one of the dimensions is whether or not that brand or that organization is authentic and seems to be really what they say they are, or are they somebody that is just appearing to try and spit me? So we thought that with that advent of all the communication tools, what was necessary was a step to even a newer era. And in this newer era, the relationship era, things are slightly different. And that's an era that's being formed now and being led by companies like IMC Squared. In the relationship era, it's really important to focus on me plus you. And it's not a me first, and it's not a you first. It really has to be me plus you. So the brand or the organization or the entity has to know what it is and know what it wants and know what it needs, but also the people that it's interacting with, its stakeholders. And we'll talk about what a stakeholder is in a moment, but you have to have the stakeholders' needs at just exactly the same level. Think about this as if it were a relationship between two people, say your significant other, your spouse, etc. You really have to be able to balance the needs of both parties to be able to move forward as a partnership. And in the relationship era, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about fostering sustainable relationships, because we believe that it is the only way that businesses, whether they be for-profit or not-for-profit, are going to be able to succeed now that people have become so skeptical of everything that they hear from the marketing world. Just to put a little point on this, in the consumer era, we had campaigns where we would come out with a big message and try and drive action based upon that message. But now, in the relationship era, there is no such thing as a campaign. All marketing is always on, and everything your organization does is interpreted as a communication to people that they will talk about amongst themselves. The other difference, so much of consumer era is focused on buy. The action that we really cared about was buy. And in a translation on the nonprofit side, that might be give or donate. Now, it really is join. Come with me, bring your resources, but also bring your needs, and let's sit down together and sort out our needs and our resources together and figure out how we can best move forward in a sustainable relationship. So that is really the gist of the relationship era, how to foster a sustainable relationship. And I'm going to speak just a little bit about that now. But before doing that, I want to make sure that I've defined for you what we call the stakeholder. And a stakeholder is not a shareholder. Although in the old model, in the consumer era, many times the shareholder was the only one people cared about. But we believe that the SPICE model, and this is from a book called Firms of Endearment, is the one we should be using. We have a society where the definition is the local and broader communities and the shared resources. That's a stakeholder. Another stakeholder are your partners. These could be upstream partners, such as suppliers, or horizontal partners, such as your marketing your co-marketing partners, and it can, or your agencies, and it can be downstream partners, such as retailers. There are investors, and these could be both individual or institutional. There are customers, the people who consume what we produce, and there are employees. And in the nonprofit world, there are probably some others as well. Stakeholders might be donors, for instance. They're like investors. There might be volunteers, which are very much like your partners. And there might be clients instead of customers. But what you see here is that in a relationship era model, you're trying to balance the stakeholder needs so that as many people as possible can win. The idea here is to build a sustainable relationship where everybody wins. So I've used that term sustainable relationship a few times, and here's what we think that means. A sustainable relationship involves high levels of transaction and trust. And I'm going to define both of those concepts because they're not exactly obvious the way that we think about them. When we talk about trust, we talk about three core components. The first core component of trust is credibility. Does an organization deliver on its promise? Does a nonprofit send the percentage of money to provide services that it should? Does a brand sell you something that does what it says it's supposed to do? To us, that's table stakes. You've got to be credible to earn trust. But that's not nearly enough. Although in the consumer era, that's often where brands stop. They said, if we can just get you to believe us, then you'll buy from us. We think the next level of trust is care. Does a brand or an organization understand my needs? Do they really do things that I didn't even ask for that help to make my life easier? This might be the putting a camera that shows the back of an SUV. You didn't necessarily ask for it, but it certainly lets you avoid possibly running over the toys in the driveway or something like that. That kind of deeply understanding what I need. And then finally, the last level of trust is congruency. Do the values of the organization or the values of the company resonate with my personal values? And here's where I think nonprofits have had a leg up, actually, because your values are so clear that people understand what you're trying to do and understand your purpose. For many for-profit companies, that hasn't been nearly as clear, so it's been harder for people to know whether their values resonate. So those three things are what we call trust. And then on the transaction side, what we really mean is an exchange between two parties where each receives something of value commensurate with the value they provide. In the for-profit world, I've given you my money and I want your product back, and I feel like there's a fair value exchange. And if it's a good exchange, I'll spend more money with you. In the nonprofit world, it might be, again, whether or not I'll donate funds to your cause because I see the work or the value that your organization brings, and that's commiserate with my donation. Or I might volunteer my time. Again, I volunteer my time because I believe your organization provides value that's commiserate with the value that I've provided you. So those two things independently are what we think causes us a sustainable relationship. But now, any of you that went to business school, you know what happens. If you have two factors and they're independent, what you want to do is you want to put them on a 2x2 matrix. That's how we think. And so here is the 2x2 matrix where you could have low or high trust, and you can have low or high transaction. And we call this a brand sustainability map. And what you can see is that there are 4 quadrants there. Clearly, if you don't have any trust or transaction, you're in a limited relationship that's not going to go forward very well. Likewise, if you have high trust and you have high transaction, you're in a sustainable relationship, one that should be able to weather issues. An example might be something like happened to Toyota recently when they had all the problems with their braking systems. They had a lot of problems, a lot of things came out, a lot of people were fairly angry, but amazingly, they had a pretty good bounce back in terms of their sales of products because they had spent 40-some years in the North American market building some trust with people. And so people said, look, you made a mistake and you did wrong, and that's not a good thing. But you know what? We'll give you another chance because we trust you. And that kind of trust buffers you when you do make a mistake like that. In the other 2 categories, you have the emotional and the reluctant relationship. The emotional relationship is where people trust you highly, but they don't do business with you. And unfortunately, there may be nonprofits that fall into this category where people say, oh, the work that that group is doing is terrific. I'm not giving them any money, I'm not giving them any time, but boy, I'm sure glad they're doing that work. Well, that emotional relationship clearly isn't sustainable, right? Without some kind of funding, it's hard to continue to do that good work. In the reluctant category, we find many for-profit brands in this category. This is where you would shift or switch if you could. This is where I spend money with you, but I don't really trust you. For me personally, I have a reluctant relationship with American Airlines. I spend a lot of money with them, but if I had a different option, I would. You know, when you're in that reluctant relationship, one of the problems is if you're a for-profit, you're all the time having to resell people. You're having to do campaigns and bring out new and improved products. It's a very expensive place to be. And frankly, it's a very expensive place to be for nonprofits. Believe it or not, there might be a nonprofit that could fall into that category. Say, for instance, an organization partners with a nonprofit to get employees to donate. And so they have a campaign inside the walls of the employer. Everybody donate to whatever the cause might be. Well, there might be subtle pressures for those employees to have to donate. And there might be the kind of things that basically make them reluctant givers. And so just like a for-profit, a not-for-profit who might have a reluctant relationship has to spend a lot of human capital, a lot of time, a lot of marketing money to just get people to continue to give. And so it's a very non-sustainable place to be. And I'm going to move a little quicker so that I make sure that you get to hear the good part, which is what Jonathan does. But I wanted to show you, we have plotted some brands, we've done research, and you can see the difference in different kinds of brands. McDonald's is in a more reluctant relationship, and Subway in a more emotional relationship. Costco falls into that sustainable category. Although they don't have as big a revenue as Walmart, they seem to have a much higher trust amongst people. And I'll show you a Whole Foods is a beautiful example of an emotional category. People love the fact that they're there and unfortunately spend their grocery dollars elsewhere. And you can see some of the usual suspects down in the reluctant category, your banks and your wireless carriers. And then here are some sustainable brands that we have uncovered as we've done work. And you can see that these are brands that probably have very passionate folks who support the brand. I think of Harley-Davidson and the fact that there are over 10,000 people in the United States who have the brand tattooed to their skin. Now that's a passionate group of people who probably have high trust in the brand. So as you're looking at this brand sustainability map and you're thinking about what we've talked about with relationship era marketing, I challenge you to think about where you think your company or your brand or your organization might fall. Do you have a reluctant relationship where people are transacting but not necessarily trusting you? Or do you have an emotional relationship where people trust you greatly but aren't transacting? And one of the things that's an interesting thing about the nonprofit segment, you probably have congruency well pinned, but there are some issues around credibility. And I know some of you know this, but there are nonprofit organizations that get discussed a lot in terms of, well, do they really turn the dollars to the best use? And just like a for-profit brand, those conversations are going on out there in the social space, whether you get to hear them or not. And so I would really recommend that you think about where your brand might fall. And if it's not as optimal as you wish, think about which way you want to move. Do you want to move your transactions? Do you want to move your trust? And you use your marketing efforts to help you do the one that you need to do. So if you are in the relationship era, how do you win? And we think there are 5 real quick tips. First, go in with a purpose. Again, for you, the nonprofits, this may be obvious. The for-profits, it may not be so obvious. By the way, making money is not a purpose. Making money is an outcome. The purpose is, why did the business get started in the first place? Why do you exist? And what would people miss if you didn't exist? Second, commit to those sustainable relationships. Commit to doing things that raise your transaction but do not degrade your trust, or that raise your trust but do not degrade your transaction. It's never okay to sacrifice one for the other because you're always moving up and right. A third factor, connect with authenticity. And what this means is warts and all. Talk about yourself both in terms of what you do well and in terms of what you don't do so well. Make sure that people understand that you are truly out there offering the information people want to know about your organization or your brand. Treat customers, or any stakeholder actually, as partners. They have things to offer you and they have things that they need from you. And in a partnership, you've got to be aware of both of those. And finally, engage. Engage, engage, engage. Give people multiple ways to give you feedback, to talk to you, to dialogue with you. It's not really enough to just broadcast a message to people. It's now necessary to have a wide open channel that listens very hard to hear what people are saying, maybe amongst themselves, not even when they're talking to you. You know, the social networks allow us to do a lot of that these days. So those 5 principles are 5 principles that we believe help businesses to win in marketing. And in the second part here, Jonathan's going to talk about whether or not this works in one particular area, the area where for-profits and not-for-profits work together. And so he'll take that over. But I'm going to stop it right here and just ask, are there any burning questions that are showing up from the VolunteerMatch side that we should answer?
I think we're good so far. Everyone's pretty engaged.
Okay, well, very good. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan and let him talk to you guys for a little bit.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. You know, for my Hebrew brothers and sisters, Happy New Year. I just wanted to pick off kind of where Mark left off, you know, with those principles, you know, to driving kind of success in the relationship era. And the good news is that a lot of these principles are actually already at work in the world of marketing. And there are a lot of examples. So getting prepared for today, I really wanted to find those examples in that area where for-profits and nonprofits are often connected, and that's usually called cause marketing. Probably familiar with that term. So in the consumer era that Mark kind of mentioned, where the model is really about persuasion, always towards buying the product, the cause marketing model typically goes something like this. You know, the consumer is seeking, you know, that congruency, that values alignment. they buy a product from a brand. That brand has already selected a nonprofit, and they're going to direct a percentage of that purchase to it. Obviously, the brand feels like they benefit from this kind of do-gooder affiliation with the nonprofit, and the nonprofit kind of gets a little bit of a funding boost from the relationship. Now, in the relationship era, where the model is about focusing on sustainable relationships with multiple stakeholders, cause marketing is completely being transformed right now. So a lot of the examples that I'm about to share go back to the principles, the 5 principles that Mark just mentioned, but really focus on where this area of connection is between kind of the for-profit space and the nonprofit space. Oop, can I go back?
Yeah, here.
Yeah, thanks. So to kind of start back with those principles, Mark talked about, one of the primary principles, the beginning principle in the relationship era being to clarify your purpose. And there's a new wave of entrepreneurs. Some might call themselves social entrepreneurs or conscious capitalists who are actually, establishing or going back and kind of recreating their businesses in a way that starts with that clarity of purpose and much greater stakeholder engagement. So for these businesses, a cause doesn't really emanate from the marketing team. Those causes are an authentic expression of that purpose and the culture that's really, ingrained in the organization. So in other words, it's something that they would probably do even if no one heard about it. And the example that I chose here is New Belgium Brewing Company. It's a relatively small company in Fort Collins, Colorado. But as they tell it, the company was born on a bike when its founder was riding through European villages on a beer tour. And ever since, the brand has really attracted and supported followers with an ethic of personal environmental responsibility. A great story that's kind of become a part of the lore of that company is that when they had to choose whether to pay a premium for wind-powered electricity, they actually asked their people because it was going to impact the employees' profit-sharing pool, which already goes to show you that this is a company that kind of had those stakeholders in mind in the way that they operated that business. And those people, their employees, unanimously voted for clean energy, despite the fact that it would have impacted their profit sharing. To encourage sustainable transportation, you can kind of see in the upper left-hand corner, every employee gets one of those custom bikes after 1 year of employment. And so their annual traveling bike festival, which is probably the closest thing that they would have to a marketing tactic, is called the Tour de Fête. It obviously references the Tour de France, but it's a 13-city tour basically where they travel and entertain and really promote bicycling as a viable form of transport at the same time that they're raising funds for environmentally focused nonprofits. So the lesson here, if a cause for the for-profits that are out there, if a cause isn't part of the company's DNA, then the company probably shouldn't make a marketing campaign out of its support. I think it's also an instructive example of how an organization's soul can really come from its employees. And from a nonprofit perspective, think about assessing your corporate partnerships through this lens. Is the purpose of the business that you're partnering with really truly aligned with the purpose of your organization? Even if a brand doesn't necessarily have an organically grown culture around a cause, like, say, a New Belgium brewery, another approach is to apply the company's expertise to a relevant problem. And a lot of times, this not only has a greater impact than philanthropic dollars, but it can yield those sustainable relationships and those authentic connections moving forward. And the example I chose here was GE's Eco-Imagination Challenge, which is actually open right now. Now, this is not a philanthropic, purely philanthropic endeavor. They're awarding $200 million to support ideas in the clean energy space through an open platform where businesses, entrepreneurs, innovators, students, anyone can get on and submit proposals. But aside from the dollars that they're eventually going to throw at these ideas, they're really interested in applying their expertise, which if you know GE, everything's big. You know, their expertise is bringing technology to scale. So, you know, and they're very open about the fact that some of these ideas will be evaluated as potential commercial relationships. You know, and again, this impacts their financial bottom line. It's not philanthropic, but it is relevant to the business. And again, it will solve a real world problem. So the takeaway here for profit brands, you know, ask, what are you good at? You know, use that skill to advance a relevant cause. And from a volunteering perspective, consider how important that skills-based volunteering becomes in this context. You know, employee volunteering is always good, but the social impact and the marketing potential of skills-based volunteering is exponentially greater. And, you know, on the other side, for nonprofits that are out there, if you're not already doing this, start making that push for skills-based volunteers. You probably already know this, but the time of those skilled professionals from the private sector can be far more valuable than the dollars that you get or the extra hand volunteer hours. And probably more importantly, through those relationships with those skills-based volunteers, you'll start to build an entirely different level of engagement and investment that can turn into a more sustainable relationship with the organization, with the company at large. Next, you know, this is perhaps the most obvious transformation of what used to be called, you know, cause marketing. But here with that relationship era twist, you know, companies are asking, you know, who better to help, you know, guide a company's causes than the people who work for it or the people who buy from it. So even if you're starting from scratch, you know, even if, you know, you're not sure like a GE how to you know, bring your expertise to bear, or you're not, your cause and your culture and your purpose is still kind of developing and baking in. You know, this is an idea that is easy to, you know, to kind of grab onto, and that's that you see brands crowdsourcing ideas from those employees and customers. And there are lots of examples out there. The slide that you see there is from Pepsi's Refresh Project, which you're probably familiar with, but it's my favorite because they've essentially created an entire social media infrastructure for change agents out there across America. And they made a bold move at the beginning of the year to pull $20 million from their Super Bowl TV spend and instead direct those dollars towards funding small grants for projects submitted and then voted upon by everyday citizens who get on and simply vote online. So they've really shown what's possible when a brand, you know, goes to some of those principles that Mark touched on earlier, as far as making their customers their partners, you know, and not only, you know, trusting them as such, but you know, putting dollars and investing in those customers as partners. And again, you know, Mark also mentioned kind of engaging as a key principle here. So, you know, they're clearly doing that at the same time. So for brands, you know, the lesson, I think, isn't necessarily to go out and create another refresh project. There are other ways to really listen for the values and the causes that your stakeholders care about and to find ways to engage them in creating solutions. For nonprofits, this may be obvious, but you know, get in this game if you haven't yet. You know, this trend isn't going away. There's a new crowdsource, you know, philanthropy project, you know, kind of coming on board every week. So, you know, I encourage you to kind of get in this game if you haven't yet, and to be tactical about it. And I think Nancy Loveland, if you're not familiar with her work, she's got some excellent tactical advice on that note. She just has a recent article in the recent issue of Fast Company that I would definitely direct you to, and we can share in the archive of today's presentation. But more broadly, for nonprofits that are out there, think about engagement. You know, this is an amazing way as a nonprofit, you know, to not necessarily go out to your supporters or your followers and say, please give me money, or please come out and volunteer. You know, the ask here is much, much smaller, but perhaps just as powerful. You know, take that 5 to 10 seconds out of your day to log on, vote for this cause. You know, it's going to end up in increasing your transactions. And think about at the same time that as a follower, you feel engaged. You feel a part of supporting supporting this cause in a way that you might not have otherwise. The last example I want to share kind of goes to Mark's principle that he touched on as far as not just making your customers a partner, but make your cause your partner. You know, too often companies want to have a one-way relationship with the cause. You know, we, the company, will provide support, and you, the cause, will kind of provide the accolades. Instead, you know, make sure that all the stakeholders, especially the cause, has a seat at that marketing table. One example that I've been following closely is Levi's collaboration with the town of Braddock, Pennsylvania, as part of their We Are All Workers campaign. You know, Braddock, Pennsylvania is the site of Carnegie's first steel mill, but now, you know, it's one of the many Rust Belt communities that's kind of struggling to reinvent itself, you know, during tough times that extend beyond the current recession, you know, that have been going on for multiple generations. And this We Are All Workers campaign, what it does is it tells the story of the people of Braddock. You know, it actually casts the residents and pays them to appear in the ads instead of using models. You know, working with the IFC, they created a series of remarkably honest and high-quality videos that I would recommend going out and checking out. At the same time, the company has invested in Braddock's community center, public library, and even an urban farming program. You know, for those who question the sincerity of the partnership, you only have to talk to the mayor of this town, who says, you know, at no point did it ever feel like it was a marketing campaign. You know, that this is a genuine partnership. So the lesson here for brands, you know, don't just leverage a nonprofit's logo. Really consider the value of the work, the people, and the stories that are behind that logo. You know, and if there's a match with your brand's purpose, you know, there might be far more value than meets the eye. And of course, for nonprofits, you know, again, be marketing practitioners. You know, the relationship area isn't just a way to benefit from you know, the marketing spend of for-profits, but to really be, you know, be practitioners and leverage your authenticity. You know, you may very well be doing your corporate partner a favor, you know, in doing so. And obviously, again, you know, see your corporate partners as partners. You know, don't just get stuck in looking to them as potential source of volunteers or of dollars, but as genuine partners where your purposes are aligned and working towards some similar ends. So I'm going to wrap up, you know, just with a few final slides to kind of bring it together. I've shared, you know, a few different examples, but there's some trends that I think that are at work as far as collaboration that really, again, as our title said, can really benefit all stakeholders. So I just wanted to, you know, end by you know, kind of capturing some of those bigger trends. One thing that I hope is kind of clear is that our identities, you know, in the relationship era as citizens, you know, employees, consumers, volunteers, donors, they're all converging. You know, as employees, you know, we're seeking employers whom we trust, whether we work for profits or nonprofits. You know, our role as citizens is increasingly being experienced through that employer. You know, the New Belgium example, I think, really speaks to that. You know, people are there working for that company because they really, it's not, this is where I work. You know, this is a part of who I am. You know, as volunteers and philanthropists, you know, we have fewer hours, you know, fewer dollars perhaps to give. So we support causes where we feel that sense of agency and identity and effectiveness. I think, you know, the Pepsi Refresh Project kind of speaks to you know, kind of that evolving sense of how we participate in the world. And of course, as consumers, you know, we're seeking that congruency, you know, that upward level of trust where we, you know, where we're supporting, you know, businesses that really align with our values. For those of you out there who are who would identify in the field of corporate social responsibility, you may be hopefully noticing this already, but it's only going to continue. CSR is integrating into core business functions. You know, as you saw in the examples, as brands and companies recognize the value of that of congruency, CSR officials can expect to play a much more expansive role in marketing and communications, but also as business models shift to really effectively fulfill purpose and engage those multiple stakeholders, that's the expertise of a lot of CSR officials. So they're only going to become more important, more integrated into those core business units and operations. And then finally, for the nonprofit stakeholders that are on the line with us, it's an exciting time. As those for-profits are kind of getting driven and getting behind purpose, it seems like there are more resources, private resources out there to compete for. Hopefully you're seeing that. But of course, as that competition increases, you're going to see more pressure, to prove your credibility, to go back to that baseline of trust. Do you create outcomes for your stakeholders, especially for your clients, but also for for your volunteers, for your donors. And obviously as social media becomes even more prominent, you saw that in some of the examples. The good news, you're going to be competing on an even playing field with for-profits. Think about if you're on Facebook, that feed, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, you occupy the same amount of space. So it's a tremendous opportunity. At the same time, really making sure that you're investing in your communications infrastructure. And that can be tough. There is that pressure, that kind of paradox, where if you're a nonprofit, it's sometimes tough to justify, your investment, and think about it as an investment in your marketing, but transform your understanding of marketing. A lot of what we've talked about today is really about engagement. It's not just about selling. It's about really engaging and evolving through those relationships. So clearly, not just worth it because of some of the social media competitions that are out there, but really thinking about how it can help you innovate with all of your stakeholders. So, again, finally, just being able to innovate at this stage and be flexible in your ability to collaborate and to ask your for-profit partners for help in this regard. The expertise a lot of times of that for-profit sector is around innovation, so truly seeing them as partners in this area.
Okay, so that kind of concludes what we wanted to say.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of questions that have come in, so we wanted to make sure that we had a chance to ask them. One for you, Mark, specifically around that matrix with the trust and transactions. The question is, they're just curious how volatile that is. So how quickly can something change now with relationship era marketing? And similarly, the other question was just with those specific companies or any company in general, will it change based on how long the consumer or client is engaged with you? So, as they get to know you more, potentially they trust you more, and you sort of know that that's the flow, that things are taking place. And then also potentially someone says something on Facebook and everything sort of comes crashing down. So how that all looks and how people can best manage that.
Sure. It is a fairly volatile rating. We actually do this as an omnibus study, so every week 1,000 people are asked about any of a number of brands, and we have a set of questions that we ask to get that trust score, and then we use market data to calculate transaction score. But we saw, for instance, with Toyota, when they went through the period, we saw them fall from the sustainable category into the reluctant category within a month, and then we saw a rebound over a course of 2 months. And so it is volatile. Certainly people react to what they hear out there, and it can move pretty rapidly. And yes, actually engagement kinds of activities can definitely improve a brand's position. One of the brands you might have seen on the sustainable group is the Secret deodorant brand. And you might wonder, how do you engage with deodorant? But actually, they're a client that we do work with, and one of the things that we did was we helped them bring their purpose to life. Their purpose is to help women be fearless. Their purpose isn't to keep your underarms dry. That's a function. But their purpose is to help women be fearless, and we helped them sponsor a program on Facebook where people could sign petitions to allow women to do ski jumping in the Olympics. If you know or don't know, women can do a lot of things, but they're not allowed to ski jump. In the world record holder prior to this Olympics was actually a woman. And so Secret, in terms of honoring its purpose, went out and started a campaign called Let Her Jump, and promoted that kind of fearlessness. And we saw an increase in terms of their trust level as they moved out of the very top level of the reluctant category and into the sustainable category. So yeah, you can move that number pretty rapidly.
Great, thank you. And then for Jonathan, just as VolunteerMatch, we work obviously with a lot of corporations and nonprofits who are specifically focused on engaging their volunteers and consumers and employees. Do you have any different steps that you would advise folks take if they're trying to brand their volunteer program or employee engagement program versus what the entire company is trying to do, or how those two things should be syncing up?
I think that's a moving ground and a tough question, but I think ultimately perhaps one question is to ask, why would there be a misalignment perhaps between the cause that the brand is putting out there to the public through maybe its marketing communications, and what the people of the company, the employees, the day-to-day folks that really are the soul of the organization, would have a different cause. And that's difficult. I understand that brands often get seen from the outside as being this uniform thing, and that as people, we're very different. We don't always have the same causes and the same values aligned within an organization. But I do think that there are creative ways to align those two. And I can only speak from experience on this, but take the example of for IMC Squared is Weekend of Love. We said we want to apply our expertise, our purpose of advancing relationships, and we want to deliver that service to nonprofits. And we could have started by asking only the senior leaders of the company, hey, what causes do you care about? Because we'll work with those. Instead, what we decided was, every employee is probably passionate about a cause or an organization, and we want to support them the same way. So we opened that process up. So if you care about a nonprofit, take this application, take it out to the nonprofit that you have a relationship with, and we'll see if we can staff and partner to create value for that organization. So in some ways, I would think about, maybe not publicly, but think about that crowdsourcing idea that we shared. Can you crowdsource internally to help really develop kind of the purpose of the organization through volunteerism?
Thanks, Jonathan. Another question having to do with the brand sustainability map. In your experience, Mark and Jonathan, where is it most common that a company gets stuck as they're trying to make their way over to that sustainable relationship, and kind of, is it more often in the emotional or the reluctant area, and kind of what are ways that are, things you've seen people do that help them make that transition?
In our experience, and keep in mind that the research we've done has been almost exclusively with for-profit brands, but in our experience, it's not a matter of moving transaction. People in the consumer era were focused on transaction for a very long time, and so they kind of know what levers to try and pull to change that movement to the right. Instead, it's the movement up that seems to be the thing that gets in the way most. So the way we see people move into sustainable is primarily by going right and then up. One example of that didn't go that way was Apple computers, which prior to the iPod would have been squarely in the emotional category. People loved the brand, wouldn't buy it. Then when iPod came out and made it accessible, they moved right. But things to do to move up would include doing things like making sure that you have a purpose and that purpose is well known. So many brands don't really make their actual purpose well known, so it's very hard for people to know whether they resonate with their values or not. And so, you know, just step one, make sure people know what you're about so that they can know how to interact with you. And then step two, in terms of increasing that care value, you have to truly be interested in those stakeholders as much as your own. Quick example of that, USAA Insurance, when they noticed that they had a tremendous number of auto policy holders who were serving in the Gulf War, they returned the premium checks to those people because they weren't driving their cars. They were over in a war. And, you know, that's a sign of a company that actually says, look, your interests matter as much as ours. Interestingly enough, about a quarter of those people sent the check back and said, no, you keep it. So, you know, care and congruency, those are the things that move you up.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to close with this last question and then just hear your final thoughts, Mark and Jonathan. If companies aren't PepsiCo's and GE's, you know, and they have smaller budgets, what are a few small steps they could take to kind of strengthen this relationship between their brand and their consumers and employees?
Yeah, I think Jonathan made a point on his last slide that's a great point, which is the playing field is leveled in a lot of places. The new areas of social networking provide huge opportunity for small brands with small budgets or small companies with small budgets to come out with an authentic message that people will resonate to and will spread to their friends. I mean, these days, if you've got a message that really resonates, people will pick it up and be your advocates for you. And so I would say that, you know, start small, well-contained, and well-defined. Know what you're about. Get it out there where people can find it in the Facebooks of the world and the Twitters of the world, and they'll pick it up and carry it for you. It's amazing how much of that can happen. So, you know, that would be my first piece of advice.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo that. I think, you know, when things can get a little bit too big and abstract, I would always recommend to, you know, it sounds trite, but to really start local. Think about the impact that you're having on your most immediate stakeholders, you know, and engaging those stakeholders, whether it's through social media or through some other means, but to make sure that your purpose is really coming to life in, you know, within the walls of your business. But, you know, if it's not within the walls of your business, then, you know, in the immediate community that knows the people that work at that company, you know, that interact with your business the most frequently. And I think, you know, what Mark's speaking to is you'll start to see that ripple effect, that when you have that trust, you know, people are much more inclined to take a message eventually from someone who knows, from someone who has had that personal relationship with a brand or with an organization, than they would ever be if they never had that personal testimony. So I think that's, you know, that's a beginning point to jump off from.
Wonderful. Thank you both for joining us, and for our audience joining us for this call. This has been great. For those of you on the call, stay in touch and check back in on our BPN website to see what's coming up next, and we look forward to having everyone back. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.